Coronation Street spoilers tease that in the bleak early morning hours, the silence of Weatherfield is shattered by the sound of an ambulance siren. Blue lights flash through the darkness as paramedics wheel Kit into the emergency department, his body covered in blood almost beyond recognition. The brutal attack has left him unconscious, with severe head trauma and internal bleeding. Hospital staff quickly spring into action, calling for emergency surgery as his vital signs plummet. Outside the operating room, Sarah Platt stands frozen, her arms wrapped around herself, her face as pale as a ghost. Beside her, Bernie Winter paces with nervous energy, her anxiety evident in short, broken mumbles. Kit, though new to many on the cobbles, had made his presence felt. His past had always lingered in the background, but no one could have expected it would catch up to him with such ferocity. The confrontation with Mick, the man many believed had vanished from Weatherfield's shadows long ago, had taken a terrifying turn. Just hours earlier, Kit had received a tip-off. Someone had seen Mick lurking near the canal, cloaked under a hooded jacket, his behavior twitchy and erratic. Despite Bernie's pleas to let the police handle it, Kit had gone alone. Armed with nothing but his determination and a bitter need for answers, he cornered Mick behind an old warehouse. What exactly happened in those moments remained unclear. The area was deserted, no witnesses, no cameras. But when the police arrived, alerted by an anonymous call, they found Kit collapsed against a metal skip, blood pooling beneath him, his phone smashed, and no sign of Mick. Only a few footprints, hastily wiped, remained. Back at the hospital, the clock ticked painfully slow. Sarah replayed their last conversation over and over in her head. She had begged Kit not to go. She had sensed the danger. But his stubbornness, his need to prove himself, had overridden everything. She felt it now like a brick in her chest. Bernie's reaction was different, equal parts rage and grief. As a mother, her instincts were boiling over. Kit wasn't her biological child, but that mattered little to Bernie. She had grown to care deeply, seeing in him the echoes of a past she thought she'd buried. Her thoughts kept returning to Paul, to her other children. How many more could she bear to see broken by the weight of this town's secrets? D.S. Swain arrived at the hospital shortly before sunrise. Her face was a mask of professional composure, but even she couldn't hide the concern. Kit was, after all, one of their own. She delivered the news to Sarah and Bernie quietly. The police had launched a manhunt for Mick. There was no record of him leaving the city, no CCTV at train stations or bus depots. It was as though he had vanished into thin air, with or without his family. Meanwhile, whispers began to swirl on the cobbles. Eileen Grimshaw, never one to shy away from gossip, had spotted a woman matching Mick's partner's description in the corner shop 2 days earlier. When questioned, Dev remembered the woman too. She'd seemed flustered, paid in cash, and had darted away as soon as the transaction was complete. Was she preparing to go on the run? Was she already gone? Back in the ICU, Kit's condition remained critical. The surgeons fought to control the bleeding and repair the damage to his skull. Sarah, desperate for distraction, began scrolling through his messages. Most were mundane. But one stood out, a voice note from Kit to someone unnamed, recorded minutes before he was attacked. With trembling fingers, she pressed play. Mick had been there. Maybe still was. As the manhunt intensified, another question lingered: why had Mick come back? He'd vanished after a stint in prison, with a long list of enemies and even longer list of debts. Many believed he'd skipped town permanently, escaping both justice and revenge. But now he was back, and seemingly with his family in tow. Was it desperation? A need to settle old scores? Or something darker? For Bernie, the question haunted her. She and Mick had history, ugly, violent history. He wasn't just some ghost from Kit's past, he was a tormentor from hers. Her hands trembled whenever his name was spoken aloud. And now he'd resurfaced, her world turned upside down. Was this attack on Kit a warning? Meanwhile, elsewhere on Coronation Street, the ripple effects spread. Todd Grimshaw, always sharp-eyed, noticed Sean acting oddly distant. Sean had been Kit's friend, closer than most realized. And now he was jumpy, avoiding eye contact, and had mysteriously called in sick to work. Todd suspected more than just worry. Something had spooked him. And in the shadows, someone else watched. An unnamed figure, dressed in dark clothes, eyes hidden under a baseball cap, was seen loitering near Roy's Rolls late that evening. When Shona approached to ask if he needed help, he mumbled something inaudible and quickly disappeared down an alley. Fear, confusion, and suspicion hung in the air like a fog. The cobbles were quiet, but not peaceful. People whispered behind closed doors, locked windows, and drew curtains earlier than usual. The sense that something bigger was coming crept into every corner of Weatherfield. In his hospital bed, Kit's life hung in the balance. The monitors beeped steadily, each one a promise, a plea. Sarah refused to leave his side, even as the doctors urged her to rest. She kept her hand on his, whispering stories, memories, anything to call him back. And outside, the storm gathered, unseen but not unfelt. The next move belonged to Mick. But what that move would be, no one could guess. For Bernie, the question haunted her. She and Mick had history. Ugly, violent history. He wasn't just some ghost from Kit's past, he was a tormentor from hers. Her hands trembled whenever his name was spoken aloud. And now he'd resurfaced, her world turned upside down. Was this attack on Kit a warning? Meanwhile, elsewhere on Coronation Street, the ripple effects spread. Todd, always sharp-eyed, noticed Sean acting oddly distant. Sean had been Kit's friend, closer than most realized. And now he was jumpy, avoiding eye contact, and had mysteriously called in sick to work. Todd suspected more than just worry. Something had spooked him. And in the shadows, someone else watched. An unnamed figure, dressed in dark clothes, eyes hidden under a baseball cap, was seen loitering near Roy's late that evening. When Shona approached to ask if he needed help, he mumbled something inaudible and quickly disappeared down an alley. Fear, confusion, and suspicion hung in the air like a fog. The cobbles were quiet, but not peaceful. People whispered behind closed doors, locked windows, and drew curtains earlier than usual. The sense that something bigger was coming crept into every corner of Weatherfield. In his hospital bed, Kit's life hung in the balance. The monitors beeped steadily, each one a promise, a plea. Sarah refused to leave his side, even as the doctors urged her to rest. She kept her hand on his, whispering stories, memories, anything to call him back. And outside, the storm gathered, unseen but not unfelt. The next move belonged to Mick. But what that move would be, no one could guess. By the time night fell once more, the flicker of hope had started to dim in the corridors of Weatherfield General. Sarah hadn't moved from Kit's bedside for nearly 30 hours. Her hair clung to her forehead, her hands cold from gripping his far too still fingers. When the monitors bleeped irregularly, her breath caught in her throat. She'd begun whispering promises, things she never thought she'd say. That she'd forgive his stubbornness. That she'd stop trying to control every outcome. That she'd do anything, if only he would wake up. Down the corridor, Bernie faced her own battle. D.S. Swain had taken her into a quiet room, away from Sarah, and asked her plainly if she believed Mick was capable of murder. Bernie had hesitated. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she did. She knew what he'd done before, what he'd threatened to do, the kind of man he became when his back was against the wall. And now, with Kit lying broken and bleeding, she saw her worst fears materialize. "He said he'd destroy everything I loved," Bernie murmured to Swain. "That was years ago. But he meant it." Swain leaned forward. "Did he ever mention Kit specifically? Did he know who Kit was to you?" Bernie's silence was answer enough. She wasn't sure if Mick had put it together yet. But if he had, if he knew that Kit was part of her life now, then the attack wasn't just vengeance. It was a message. That evening, a breakthrough came. A woman spotted in the early hours at a petrol station near the bypass matched the description of Mick's partner. CCTV confirmed it. She'd been driving an old silver Vauxhall, a child in the back seat, bags loaded into the boot. The registration traced to a fake address, but it was something. Swain ordered roadblocks. But Mick was still ahead of them. Always one step ahead. As Bernie returned to the ICU, a nurse called her aside. Kit had stirred, just slightly, just for a moment. His fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered. Sarah cried openly, sobbing into Bernie's arms. It was the first good news they'd had. But Kit remained unconscious. The doctors warned them it might be days before he woke, if at all. Still, it was enough to ignite hope. In the meantime, DS Swain's team uncovered a critical detail. Forensic examination of the warehouse had turned up a torn strip of fabric, a shirt belonging to Mick. But more importantly, a set of fingerprints on a baby's bottle didn't belong to him. They belonged to a woman, Mick's daughter from a previous relationship, long thought estranged. That revelation cracked open an entirely new motive: family coercion. Sarah, determined to do something, anything, began digging. She found Kit's old notebooks in his flat, pages filled with notes about Mick, diagrams of connections, surveillance sketches. One name appeared repeatedly: Cal. At first, she thought it might be a pseudonym. But then she realized it was short for Callum, the same Callum who'd once tormented her family, and who was supposedly dead. Could it be connected? Could Mick's return tie into something even darker? Sarah brought the notes to DS Swain, who read them with a clenched jaw. "We may be looking at something wider," she said finally. "Something deeper than just Mick." Meanwhile, on the cobbles, Bernie faced questions of her own. People wanted answers: Dev, Eileen, even Gemma. Why was Mick back? Why now? And most of all, why had Kit gone after him alone? Bernie's frustration mounted. She couldn't explain what she didn't understand. But one thing became clear: someone had tipped Mick off. Someone local. Todd, growing suspicious of Sean's avoidance, confronted him outside the Rovers. Sean broke down, admitting that he'd seen Mick 2 days before the attack. He hadn't recognized him at first. Mick had approached him under a false name, asking about Kit. Sean, eager to help someone who claimed to be an old friend, had talked freely. It wasn't until after the attack that he realized who it had been. Todd passed the information to Swain, and within hours, a sketch was circulated. Witnesses began to come forward. One saw Mick near the canal, another near the old market. The net was tightening. But then a twist came: Mick made contact. Bernie received an anonymous message on her burner phone. It was a voice clip. Mick's voice, unmistakable, slow and venomous. "I warned you. But you dragged that boy into it anyway. Now you've got blood on your hands." The message ended with the sound of a child crying. Bernie collapsed onto the sofa, shaking. Sarah called Swain, who traced the message back to a burner phone purchased in Rochdale. They were close, but still not close enough. As night drew in again, Bernie made a decision. She would confront Mick herself. Swain refused to approve it, but Bernie had made up her mind. She knew him better than anyone. She'd bait him. Draw him out. And this time, he wouldn't escape. She returned to the place it had all started, the canal path. She waited, heart pounding, staring at the water as memories rushed back. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Mick. He was thinner, his face gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. But that same menace lingered in his stance. Didn't think you had the guts, he sneered. Bernie stood her ground. You've taken enough. Leave the boy alone. Mick laughed coldly. You think this is about him? It was always about you. He just got in the way. Behind them, police lights suddenly flared. Swain had followed. Armed officers moved in. Mick turned to run, but slipped, crashing into the canal's edge. He was dragged from the water, coughing, handcuffed, screaming incoherently. It was over. At the hospital, Sarah received the call just as Kit opened his eyes. He blinked slowly, disoriented, but conscious. Mum, he rasped, looking up at Bernie. It was the first time he'd said it. Bernie wept. The storm had passed, but its damage would linger for a long time. And on Coronation Street, the wounds would take time to heal. But for now, there was breath and hope and light through the darkness.